So in this lecture, we're going to take a look at basically why it's more easier to comprehend, and we're going to see it in action of how do you create compositions instead of using inheritance when you're working with your React components. Traditionally in programming and object-oriented programming and JavaScript also, when you have commonalities such as these sections, they're all sections, and it makes sense to create a class that's all about sections that would then have all of the things that sections have, and then derive out it through inheritance, go on and implement specificalities that relate to an element. But really in React, and generally speaking in my perspective in programming in general, you're better off with composition, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this lecture. Now, composition is almost always, you could almost work with almost always use composition instead of inheritance, and it makes things a lot more visually clear what they are. Now, we're still going to create a section, and to do that, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call it section, and I'll call it section.js, and let me just go ahead and save it. Now, section.js is literally going to be a component just like the about section, but instead of being a whole component, what it's actually going to be is it's going to be basically you could say a representation of all the things that don't really change or are shared commonalities between everyone. So if we take a look at this, this is the content of our about section. So that's not really part of our element, right? What we would have here is actually that content. But when we look at all the rest, almost everything else in here is kind of relatable. Now, not 100%, but kind of relatable. Now, I'm going to call this section. Now, we're going to implement it as we implement it into our about section. And what I want to do in the about is basically replace our full section here. And instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import our section, which is from related to the current folder that I'm in. I'm looking for section. And what are we going to return? We're going to return a section. Beautiful. So that's what we're returning. We're returning a section, but not only are we returning a section, we're going to return a section and put inside the actual content of our about section. So we're just going to put that content right into the section. And let's also send in all of the dynamic elements, that all the things that we really want to have here that will be dynamic. So first of all, everything here, our ID and our class name is stuff that we want to send in. So I'm just going to go ahead and send that in. From a level of content, we want to make sure that our about changes as well, because that is the title there. So I'm going to go ahead and set here a title and send it to be our about. Now let me just word wrap here, view word wrap, and I'm going to go ahead and delete our section. So just going over what we've just created here, if I just run through it really quickly, I created a new section. The content of that section is really only the dynamic part of our element. Beyond that, all the rest is sitting and living within our section. We're sending in all of our dynamic attributes, which was our class name, ID, and title. Now, if we go into our section, we really want to implement this. So if we go back into our section, first of all, for our class name, instead of sending in a string, we're actually going to pass along the value from this.props class name. And for our ID, we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to pass along the ID, literally just having it props ID. And last but not least, well, almost last but not least, we want to change our about to be our this props and title. Now the last part that's left is to make sure that the content of our about section, the content of the section, will be printed out exactly here inside of this row. To do that, I'm going to call our this props children, and that's all I had to do to make sure my about section is rendering with our new section model. Now let me just check and see that we don't have any errors, and we sure don't, and our about section has been rendered beautifully. Alright, let's continue and implement our new section we've created for our portfolio and also for our contact me, or our contact form. So let's start with our portfolio. I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and in our portfolio what I'm going to do is again going into our portfolio item itself, which is already now quite nice, I'm going to go ahead and change it to be an uppercase section. Notice, by the way, very importantly, notice how our section itself, when it's lowercase, it's regular HTML. When it's uppercase, it's not regular HTML anymore, but it's actually looking for a class. So we have here our portfolio, we have a title as well. We're not sending in a class name on contrary to our contact where we had where are you? No, not contact, our about section where we had a class name of success that we were sending in. In the case of our portfolio, we're not doing that, but instead of that, we're only sending in our title of portfolio. Now, all this stuff is already not relevant, but we are sending in the children. That is true still. But we don't have all this content anymore, nor do we have this container anymore. So it's literally just a section with its children, which is so much cleaner. Look how beautifully simple this is at this stage. Now, through the art of composition, we're composing it. All we have to do is we have to make sure that we're importing, just like we do in our about, we are importing our section into our portfolio. Now, let's go ahead and do this also for our contact before we test things out. So again, for our contact, we're gonna use a section. Instead, we're gonna set a title property and send in the actual title that is going to be used. And we're only gonna put in the content itself without the actual row. So here we go. So this is the content of the section. And we wanna make sure that we are, what happened to my mouse? My mouse fell asleep, so we'll use no mouse. And mouse, come back, I need you. All right, no mouse. Oh, we're back. Beautiful. So now let me just make sure that I'm not putting too many divs. So the form is here, I have one div, and then we have the section. So making sure that we close the section with an uppercase letter as well, because again, we're looking for a class. It's not actually HTML sections. That's it. Now it's time for us to test it out and see if it actually is working. And if we take a peek, we'll see our portfolio is still working, our about is still working, and our contact me is still working. And the beauty of this composition that we've done, that we've composed inside the section, we didn't need inheritance. Things are very clear because we could see what we've added into our component. And as we find more things that are reusable, we could extract them into separate classes and then use them. Now, in a relatively unrelated topic, but completely related, I want to talk about another something that relates to ES6, kind of like a break from learning about composition. And in the next lecture, I want to teach you a little bit more about variables and how do they work in ES6 and the types of variables that are available. In this lecture, we really made the case for composition and saw how to use composition in React. In the next lecture, we'll continue down the path of creating components as we look at how do we create dynamic children that are derived out of model data.